So here's the story. At UViz last summer, on a boat in the rain, Sophia, who recorded earlier, if you haven't met her, she was a scholar 10 years ago. Sophia and I were talking to a member who said, next year, could we bring in external speakers? Could we find one of those people who talk about the future? What do you call them? And Sophia and I looked at one another and said in unison, a futurist. So Loa, the member from Bigger Picture in Denmark, went on to say, a futurist, someone who could tell us about future trends that our clients and we would be grappling with, that we would be recording. That's the kind of external speaker I'm thinking about, Loa said. So I came home from Berlin and I asked a bunch of colleagues and friends, because I spent 20 years at Global Business Network, a company that specialized in scenario planning and the future. Who do I call? And everyone said Joel Garreau. Everyone. Q, may I have my slide now? This is a recording I did of Joel in 2002. I've recorded Joel a whole bunch of times over the years. Because, you know, because of that, Joel knows what we do and he understands our value. Now, I'm showing you this little chart because, like many of you, I suspect that I hardly ever remember anything I recorded. I used to think that it was a real problem, and then Susan Kelly said, if you'd remembered it all, then you'd explode. But on this day, Joel said, will Shakespeare be able to recognize humans? And that has stuck in my head all these years, because he was talking about how we, the human race, was evolving and how we're changing and how different we are from the people that Shakespeare interacted with. Joel stretched my thinking that day and it stuck. He's here to rattle our cages and to be provocative. He's that external speaker that Loa was asking after. I can't wait to see the connections we all make as the week goes by with what Joel Garreau has to say. Knock him dead.
Damn. I'm going to have her preach my funeral. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Knock 'em dead, she said. Okay, here we go. What I want to talk to you today about is that we are at a turning point in history. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, our technology is not so much aimed outward at modifying our environment in the fashion of fire, clothes, agriculture, cities, space travel. Instead, our technologies are increasingly aimed inward at modifying our minds, our memories, our metabolisms, our personalities, and our kids. Now, this is one of the 5 or 6 biggest holy shit moments in the history of the species. And I mean, this is right up there with writing and in the Industrial Revolution. That's because we're the first species now to take control of our own evolution, not in some distant science fiction future, but right now on our watch. And what I want to talk to you about today is kind of give you a roadmap that I wrote about in my book, Radical Evolution, to the next 10 or 20 or 30 years of this idea of what it means to be human. Someday soon, some kid you know is going to come home in tears again. And he's going to say that he just can't keep up with the other kids who are more athletic than he is, who are smarter than he is, who are more beautiful than he is, better behaved, better at getting into the best colleges. And the reason is that their parents regularly invest in the human enhancement technologies that are coming on the market, and you haven't. What a rotten parent you are. Well, what happens when that day comes? Well, I can think of 3 possibilities. One is that you say, we don't care what the other parents do to their kids' minds and bodies. We love you just the way you are. Go wipe your nose, go play in traffic. That's option number one. Option number two is you go out and remortgage your house again in order to compete in this Cold War of people who are attempting to outperform everybody else. And the third possibility is you try to get the enhanced kids thrown out of your school. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that if you do that, the gap is just going to get wider and wider between those who enhance themselves and those who don't. But what you can't do is ignore this, because these changes in what it means to be human are coming at you right now on our watch. I don't know if you can read this in the back. It's one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons. It says, obviously, they're evolving much faster than we are. Let me tell you how this all came about. Is anyone here, raise your hand, is anyone here old enough to remember when televisions weren't flat? Good. Is anybody here old enough to remember answering machines? Cool. Okay. Video cassette recorders. All right, good. Okay, wait a minute, this one's hard. You ready? The Sega Genesis. Okay, Sonic the Hedgehog, anybody? All right, few, okay. Does anybody remember when computer screens only came in black and white? Or green? Good. All right, this one. All right, nobody's here. This is this old. Does anybody here remember rotary dial telephones? Yes. Okay. How about polio? Okay. Now, the reason this list is semi-amusing is that we've been living through a period of exponential change. Does anybody here know what I mean when I talk about Moore's law? Okay. Let me go through this. Moore's law. So back in 1965, there was a guy named Gordon E. Moore who was a physical chemist. And he was living in an obscure part of California, south of San Francisco, that didn't really have a name yet. And he was involved in this brand new technology called computer chips. The first one had come off the assembly line in 1959. And he was involved in this. And what he did in 1965 was that he noticed that the number of transistors that you could get on a piece of silicon for $1 had been regularly doubling in the 6 years that this technology had existed. And he boldly predicted that this was going to become the case. This is going to continue for another 10 years. Well, little did he know. Gordon Moore ended up becoming one of the founders of Intel. Intel Inside, the computer people. And he's now a bazillionaire many times over. But what he's probably going to be remembered the most for by history is what is now called Moore's law. And this is now the core faith of the entire information processing industry worldwide. And the way it is frequently stated is that the amount of computer firepower that you can buy for $1 will double every 2 years or every 18 months as far as the eye can see. Now, a doubling is an amazing thing. It means that every step, every 2 years, is as tall as all of the previous steps put together. Every 2 years, every kerchunk, it goes like that. What that means is that this is an exponential curve. We've never seen anything like this before in human history. We've now had 32 doublings since 1959, which means that the amount of firepower that you've seen in this information technology is now billions of times greater than it was back then, and in our lifetimes. This is no time at all. And that's an amazing thing. And many of you have seen this, in your lives. If you've got a smartphone, this has got more firepower than did the entire North American Air Defense Command in 1965 when Gordon Moore first prophesied. Memory sticks? Anyone? Yeah? I've never paid for one of these in my life. You know, they give them away at conferences like candy bars. This thing has got more firepower than did a Cray supercomputer from the 70s. Anybody got a smart card that'll let you into your buildings? Okay. This has got more firepower than an IBM Pentium 386 from the late 80s. And it's pocket lint. It's designed to be thrown away. Who hasn't had the experience of, you know, deciding to buy somebody a whiz-bang computer for Christmas, right? And it's got 512 gigs of this and 286 of something else, and it's just a fire breather, right? $2,000 computer. That very same computer, a year later, the next Christmas, you'll suddenly see will be $1,300, and you'll kick yourself. But no, because there's another one coming on that's $2,000, and that's Moore's law in action. And what that means is that in 10 years, you'll be able to buy that fire breather for $31.25, and you'll be able to get it for free with a subscription to The Economist. What that means is that this curve, it means a lot of things. One of the things is that every 15 years, the price of any information technology drops by 3 orders of magnitude. So that means that anything that's in a hospital for $1 million, okay, will be, you know, available to you, you know, in your office in 15 years for $10,000. Anything that costs $10,000 today will be available to you for 10. And you've seen this all your life, like the examples I just showed you. Now, what this also means in terms of our futures is that you can't, when you're thinking 20 years out, the last 20 years is not a reliable indicator of the next 20 years. The last 20 years is a reliable indicator to the next 8. That's the arithmetic of Moore's law. It also means that the last 50 years is not a reliable indicator of the next 50 years. It's a reliable indicator of the next 14. Okay, that's the pace of change that we're in. Now, the thing is that this has been going on for a long time, this kind of acceleration of change. I talk about the stage that we're in now that I'm talking to you about as radical evolution. That's the third stage of evolution, actually. The first stage is the kind that Darwin talked about, right? Biological evolution. Now, you watch what happened with biological evolution, and from the first living organisms on this planet to the first mammals, took about 400 million years. From the first mammals to the first monkeys, took about 150 million years. From the first monkeys to chimps, took 30 million years. You notice the progression here? We're accelerating on a curve. From the first chimps to walking erect, took 16 million years. From walking erect to painting on cave walls, give yourself a hand, took 4 million years. From painting on cave walls to first settlement took 10,000 years. And from first settlement to writing took 4,000 years. See that acceleration? Now, when you get writing, that's when you hit second gear in evolution. That's when you start, when cultural evolution kicks in. Because all of a sudden, you've got a brand new way of storing and sharing and collecting and distributing your ideas beyond your little hunting band, right? So, cultural evolution kicks in, and it really starts to accelerate. To the Roman Empire takes 4,000 years, and to the Industrial Revolution takes 1,800 years. From the Industrial Revolution to first flight takes 100 years. Okay, and then 66 years later, from this, 66 years later, we're on the moon. Wondering what happened. Wondering if we like that. And and it took another 20 years to get to the information age that we're in there now. And that's when the third gear kicks in, engineered evolution or radical evolution. Now, let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about when I say radical evolution. This critter here, her name is Belle. She lives at Duke in North Carolina. And she is the world's first telekinetic monkey. She can move objects long distance with her thoughts. I am not making this up. Would you like to know how you make a monkey telekinetic? I'm so glad you asked. Okay. Well, what happens is you got a lab in Duke, and the first thing you do is you get Belle hooked on computer games. She's got a joystick. And there's a flashing light on her screen. If she can take the joystick and make the cursor hit the flashing light, she gets a drop of juice, right? But Belle's a pretty smart monkey. So within no time, it becomes obvious that she almost cares about the juice, right? She's hooked on the game. Now, when that happens, what you then do is you take and you drill a hole in her head. And you take a device about the size of a baby aspirin with 100 superfine wires coming out of it. It's hooked up to a computer. And you take and you put this on her cerebral cortex, the surface of it, which is where you plan muscle motion. And you take those little bitty wires and you hook them up, and you lay them parallel to individual neurons, such that when the neurons fire, the wire notices it and takes that information to the computer. You with me so far? You got the picture in this? Okay. Then you seal her up and you fire up the computer game again. And she's playing the game, and as she's doing that, her neurons are firing, and you're watching on the computer. And when you think you got it figured out about which neurons are doing what, you then do the dirty deed. You disconnect her joystick such that nothing that she does with her arm is going to make any difference. When she finally calms down, what you then do is you watch. She's a smart monkey. So it occurs to her finally that if she thinks about moving that cursor, the cursor will move. And so she figures out that if she wants that cursor to go in that direction, if she thinks about it, it'll work. And when it does, and the cursor hits the flashing light, everybody at the lab at Duke goes nuts. They're high-fiving each other all over the place. And then to be cool about it, they take and put the signal from Belle's brain onto the internet and pipe it 400 miles north to MIT. And there, a robotic arm proceeds to dance in exactly the same fashion as would Belle's arm if she had been using her arm to control the cursor. Now, I submit to you that if you've got a monkey that can control a robotic arm 400 miles away, what you've got is a telekinetic monkey. Now, the obvious question is, why? Why would you want to do this to a monkey? And as usual, there are two answers: the official answer and the real answer. Now, the official answer is that there's an organization named DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's the innovation. It's probably the foremost innovation organization in the world. It invented the Saturn V rocket that got us into the moon, and in passing, spun off NASA. It created the internet, no matter what Al Gore says. It created the Siri phone, your personality, that'll talk back and forth to you. And in this case, what they were thinking in DARPA was that an F-35 jet fighter is an extremely complicated machine to control with a joystick. So they were thinking, how great would it be if you could create a flying machine like this that you could control with your thoughts, that you just think about where you want it to go and it would go. And especially how cool would it be if this were a two-way connection, such that you could sense whatever the machine, the airplane senses, speed, angle, curve, weapons, enemies, all of that. Suppose you could pipe that directly into your brain without need for screens or keyboards. How great would that be? That's the official answer. Now, the real answer is that at the time, the directorate involved in this, the Defense Sciences Office, was run by a guy named Michael Goldblatt. And Michael has a daughter named Gina Marie. Now, Gina Marie is a very talented young lady, graduated from the University of Arizona, bilingual, wants to go for her MBA, and she has cerebral palsy. So she's supposed to be spending the rest of her life in a wheelchair. Well, Michael got thinking, if you can control machines with your thoughts, then there's no reason in principle why those machines can't be in Gina Marie's legs. So what he did is he spent God only knows how many of your taxpayers' dollars to get Gina out of that wheelchair, to get her to get up and walk. And so I mean, basically it's a love story. But there is an example of a classic moment in human enhancement history. It's always a love story, it seems to be. And this has been going on for some time. So for example, anybody know who this is?
Barry Bonds.
Barry Bonds, right. Okay. I'm fascinated by the fact that this human enhancement business has been going on for some time. And the most sophisticated conversation that we've been having about this is on the sports pages. Because it turns out that whenever you have any advanced technology, it's always first adopted wherever there's the greatest competition. So it's not terribly surprising, where small advantages can have big consequences. So it's not terribly surprising that the early adopters of these human enhancement technologies are the military, the sex appeal industry. Botox, anyone? That's the entry-level drug for an awful lot of this. And sports. I think it's just a matter of time before the entire Chinese team comes out in the Olympics looking like steers, you know. But here we are having this fascinating conversation in our sports pages. Is Barry the same kind of human as the ones whose records he broke? Should Barry go around with an asterisk on his forehead for the rest of his life? It's a fascinating conversation. And as you probably know, if any of you are involved with universities, you can now buy tabs of pharmaceutical-grade cognition enhancement drugs at any college library for $5. I'm thinking like Adderall and Peril and stuff like that. I think at our elite institutions like my law school at Arizona State University, we've already enrolled our first class of enhanced humans. I think that's how they got the scores they did, as a result of things like Adderall. Now, let me quickly go through what's going on behind this. What's functioning here in this third gear, in this radical evolution, in this engineered evolution, is that what's accelerating on a curve are four technologies, what I call the GRIN technologies, for genetics, robotics, information, and nanotech. So let's start with genetics. Anybody know who this is? Of course. Cute critter. Anyway, what the G in the GRIN technologies is really all about is not just genetics, but it's about manipulating and understanding cells at their very most basic level. Really having humans take control of biology. And the work that's being done on this in the reasonably near term is things like memory pills. Come on. There are 78 million boomers in this country who cannot remember where they parked their car or if they have a car. This is going to be the biggest thing since Viagra, memory pills. And that's on the reasonably near horizon. Another thing that's gotten a lot of work is conquering sleep. Why do we spend so much time sleeping? Nobody really knows. One of the things DARPA is working on is biomimicry, mimicking biology. And for example, whales and dolphins do not sleep the way we do. They can't. They're mammals, right? If they slept, they'd drown, right? So what they've learned is how to sleep like a portion of their brain at a time, so that some part is always on duty. We're working on that. Conquering hunger. One of the problems that DARPA is a defense agency, one of the things that they are, the big problem for them is supporting special forces troops. Special forces troops burn somewhere between 10 and 15,000 calories a day. That's an amazing amount. You can't carry that much food. That's like 43 power bars and 3 meals ready to eat. You can't even carry it, much less, get it all down. So the question they had was, how do we support these guys in this situation? And they thought, well, now wait a minute. Suppose we just did away with eating at all for a week. All of us carry plenty of calories around on board right now. It's stored in your fat. Now the question is, well, so how can you access those calories? Well, you can, but right now it's kind of an awkward situation because the trigger mechanism to access the calories in your fat kicks in when you're starving, and that's a drag. So the question is, can you determine what that trigger mechanism is and induce it at will, so that maybe instead of sending these special forces in lean and mean, you send them in mean and plump, okay, for a week, and you trigger the mechanism, and I'm writing this all down. And all of a sudden I realize what they're talking about is burning your fat at will. At which point I say, me, give some to me. How long have I been working out? To what effect, And when you say things like that at DARPA, they smile this little smile. And they say, the civilian implications of this technology have not eluded us. The diet industry in the United States is a $60 billion a year industry, and this ends it. And yeah, so I mean, this is the kind of thing that's coming at you. And some of the things, conquering addiction vaccines, that's in the works. Conquering the energy crisis, that's in the works. At my University, Arizona State, we got an outfit called Biodesign. On the roof is creatures, genetically engineered creatures, that eat CO2 and poop gasoline. They exist. Well, crude equivalent. And so thereby ending the energy crisis and the Middle East as a problem commercially in the next 5 or 10 years. That's what these technologies are doing. Now notice that the reason that this is accelerating on a curve, this genetics, this biology, is that biology has become an information technology, right? It's basically, genetics, the first sequenced genome cost that was in 2000, cost $3 billion. 15 years later, it's about the price, your complete genome workup is approaching the price of a comprehensive blood test and dropping like a stone. It's an information technology. And now entering our present, you see these two salmon? These salmon are the same age. These are the same critters in age. The larger one is aqua bounty technology. This is the first genetically modified, FDA-cleared food for human consumption. It's an Atlantic salmon with growth hormone from a Chinook salmon and an antifreeze feature from ocean pout, an eel-like creature, so that they can eat year-round. The plan is to grow them in South Dakota, salmon, to avoid any chance of them getting into the ocean. Then there's these cute critters, these goats. These cute creatures have been genetically altered, this is real, I'm not making this up, to give milk that includes human medicine. In their case, human proteins that conquer hemophilia. In the works is genetically modified goats in whose milk you'll find substances that work against cancer, autoimmune disease, and a malaria vaccine. And this is a germline intervention, which means that all of the kids that are spawned by these goats will have the same capability. Okay, so that's genetics. Let's move on to R. The R in the GRIN technology is robotics. Everybody know what this is? Of course, right? The predator. When we're talking about robotics, what we're really talking about is the melding of the made and the born. We've already had our first cyborg vice president, Dick Cheney. Seriously. Man, he's got a chest full of hardware. He wouldn't be around today if it weren't for all the implants that he's got on board. Already, we have tens of thousands of people walking around with cochlear implants, which are basically, this allows the profoundly deaf to hear. They have never heard before. And they're like, now all of a sudden, you can patch this device right into the auditory nerve, and the profoundly deaf can hear. More rare, but in existence, are the ocular implants, which allow the blind to see by patching into the optic nerve. And that's good enough that there are now profoundly blind people who can see well enough to shoot hoops. That's true. And also in the lab, and because this is a melding of the made and the born, in the lab are memory implants and cognition implants. This week, the same lab that created Bell, announced that they had networked monkey brains. I'm not making this up. That means that they got half a dozen monkeys whose brains are attached or connected through computers that can now focus all of their neurons on a single problem. They gang circuited 6 monkeys. When this finally reaches humans, this could be the ultimate supercomputer when you're talking about connecting up trillions of our neurons. Now, these implants are pretty amazing. I mean, one of the questions I've always got is how do you change the batteries? But anyway, let me ask a question to you guys. If you could get an implant that would allow you to speak and understand Mandarin, Chinese, would you go for it? Yeah, that's about what I usually get. About half say yeah. Tells you everything you need to know about language courses. But now we're getting into the business of artificial intelligence that is giving our creations more and more human capabilities, which is the other way around. And that's, for example, Q? God, I love these guys.
Wait.
The Japanese just love humanoid robots. I mean, if I was in charge of creating the next species, I'd put them on tracks personally. But it's okay. That's anyway. But that's now a huge thing. And in fact, DARPA had a grand challenge for robots to create robots that you could use to walk into any future Fukushima reactor disaster. And a Japanese lab created a humanoid robot that won. Now, all right, so that's the R in robotics. Now, the I is information technology. Now, one of the things I want to point out about these technologies is this is not to say that we don't have anything to say in the technologies we will adopt. We do have some control. For example, can you read that? Search off. Make search diarrhea safe. Yeah. Anyway, so these guys, and as you probably know, the guys who wear Google glasses have been universally derided as glass holes. And Google has pulled the plug on this iteration. It's no longer, but you know it's just a matter of time. But the point is that we did have social impact on this. For example, when I graduated from college, God help me, back in the Paleolithic times, the music player I got as a present when I graduated involved 4 big boxes covered in walnut, right? Remember that, right? Today, that's your iPhone, right? 20 years ago, this is all information technology. A phone with a camera, a GPS locator, email, apps, and your music was science fiction. Today, it's your life. Tomorrow, it'll probably be jewelry, maybe an earring. Universal translators like Google Translate are already headed that way. In 2004, Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, told Newsweek, quote, "Where can you go? Certainly, if you had all the world's information directly attached to your brain, or an artificial brain that was smarter than your brain, you'd be better off," end quote. In 2005, he said, quote, "Why not improve the brain? Perhaps in the future, we can attach a little version of Google that you just plug into your brain," end quote. Nobody paid any attention to him 10 years ago. They thought he was kidding. Trust me, Sergey is not a big kidder. But you still have to wonder, as these technologies evolve, what happens is, suppose you get an implant, and suppose you then have a Windows crash, right? What happens then? Q? This is from Minority Report, my favorite movie. Watch this. He reaches over to shake the guy's hand and loses all his data. I love that. This gives me a reassuring future that we're still basically in the loop. I love the expression on Cruz's. Look at the expression on his face when all of a sudden he's reaching over to shake hands and all of his data disappears. All right, so that's the information I and the GRIN technologies. And now here's the N in nanotechnology. I don't know why I threw this slide in. I figured you were illustrators, you'd get off on it. But anyway, but nanotechnology is basically, I figured you'd need nanotechnology for this future. You really would. Nanotechnology involves the fundamental control of all matter and energy. Okay? What it means is that with nanotechnology, which is the science of the extremely small, what you can do is create one atom at a time or one molecule at a time. You can create anything you want. Anything you want. From a spaceship to a molecularly accurate T-bone steak. And already you're beginning to see this come to market. For example, we're seeing increasingly wearable technology, flexible, machine washable, stuff like this. You can't do that without nanotechnology. You can't have smart clothes like this without nanotechnology. And the next step is nanobots, like this illustration. And what a nanobot is, it's a robot that operates at the nanoscale. You inject millions of them into your bloodstream. And this is in development. This does not exist yet, but it's in development. And the first generation is supposed to be watchdogs. It'll go through your bloodstream and look for example, cancer cells. And if it sees one, it'll set off the alarm. The second generation nanobots are designed to be hunter-killers, such that if they do detect whatever you don't want, they can attach themselves to the bad cell and destroy it. Cancer cells, or maybe, if you like, fat cells. Anyway, so these are the technologies that are in the pipeline that are changing what it means to be human, the green technologies. So let me, okay, so much for the boys and their toys. I don't really care about technology. I care about culture and values, who we are, how we got that way, where we're headed, what makes us tick. So let me go through 3 scenarios here to what happens as a result of all this to the future of the human race. And there are 3. And the heaven, hell, and prevail. Now the first one is the heaven scenario. This is the Ray Kurzweil Memorial scenario, if you've ever heard of him. Singularity University and the Singularitarians and all those guys. They're the darlings of Silicon Valley. And in this scenario, the heaven scenario, the curve of technology goes straight up. We conquer pain, and they're serious, pain, suffering, stupidity, ignorance, and even death. They're serious. And eventually we merge with our machines, and we live happily ever after. Perfectly reasonable scenario. Could happen. It's a credible scenario. I mean, already we have sex symbols in their 50s on the cover of People magazine, right? Didn't it used to always be this way, right? Wait, brace yourself. Here we go. We have rock and roll stars in their 70s. Mick Jagger, white courtesy phone. Serious NIH scientists have a bet going on right now that the first person to robustly and youthfully live to the age of 150, robustly and youthfully, are already alive today, and possibly in this room. So that, I mean, it's a perfectly credible scenario, but it's only one scenario. Then there's hell. The hell is the mirror opposite of the heaven scenario, right? Same curve of change, but suppose it goes down instead of up. Suppose this technology gets into the hands of madmen or fools. In this scenario, we could wipe out all of life on Earth in the next 20 minutes. Seriously. Again, it's a credible scenario. Are you familiar with the Australian mousepox incident? No? Okay. So there's this, so Australia is this isolated ecosystem that from time to time has an introduced species that has no natural enemies and it runs amok. And one of these apparently is mice. So from time to time they're just up to their ass in mice. And, and they eat everything, crops, houses, everything. And so the Australian geneticists decided that what they wanted to do was create a mouse contraceptive. And instead what they did was they inadvertently created a monster. They took a virus that causes mousepox, which is a disease that mice get, and they made one tweet. They didn't know that one tweet could be this powerful. They made one tweet, and all of a sudden this virus was 100% fatal. Every single mouse died. And because they're scientists, what they proceeded to do was then ballyhoo their discovery by putting on the internet every detail they had about exactly how you could now do this. Well, this drives the hell scenario people nuts because mousepox doesn't hurt humans, but it's a very close relative of smallpox, which obviously does. So in principle, if you've got a half-bright grad student in some reasonably well-equipped lab, in principle, the information is now on the net that would allow him to create super smallpox that, and this is just one of thousands of scenarios of how you could imagine really bad stuff happening. Again, perfectly credible scenario. Could happen, but it's not the only one. The third is prevail. Now, this is not the one, this is the one, I never do predictions, I just do scenarios. I'm not predicting this, but it's the one that I'm rooting for because I'm a humanist. And because it is fundamentally different from the heaven and hell scenarios. Heaven and hell are basically techno-deterministic, meaning that basically their core assumption is that what matters about the future is how many transistors you can get to talk to each other, a la Moore's law. Prevail is not some middle ground. It's way off in its own territory. because it has a fundamentally different assumption. Prevail's core assumption is suppose what matters is not the transistors. Suppose what matters is how many ornery, cussed, surprising, imaginative humans you can hook up. Suppose that's what's matters. I mean, as it has in the past, throughout our history. The heart of Prevail is suppose there's not one curve of change, suppose there's two. I mean, you can pretty readily demonstrate that if our challenges are going like this, if our responses are more or less flat, like we're waiting for House Judiciary to solve our problems, you know, well, we're obviously toast, right? Because the gap just keeps on getting wider and wider. But suppose there's two curves of change. Suppose, in addition to our challenges, suppose our responses are also coming up on a curve. Then you got a shot. And there's reasons for guarded optimism about this. You look out at the future of the human race from, say, 1200 AD, and you see marauding hordes, and you see plague, and you say, okay, so much for this experiment, write this one off. Then in 1450, we get the printing press and movable type, and the result, you get a brand new way of storing and sharing and collecting and distributing your ideas. And the results are amazing. First you get the Renaissance, and then you get the Enlightenment, which leads to science itself and to the world we live in today, democracy. And it's amazing. And you're seeing more and more of this occur. I mean, in scenario planning, you ask yourself, how would you know if this scenario were coming about? What would be the warning signs? And, well, so the test for Prevail is, do you see an increase in the quantity, quality, variety, and complexity of ways that humans are finding to connect? Are you seeing any interesting group behavior, like a flock doing amazing things? Well, what about eBay? That's not just the world's biggest flea market. That's hundreds of millions of people doing very complicated things without leaders. What about Facebook? What about Twitter? I have no idea what Twitter is good for, but if it flips out every tyrant in the Middle East, I'm interested. So, in closing, let me explain to you what I'm trying to do about this. I don't know if you can read this in the back, another one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons that says, I was wondering when you noticed there's lots more steps. I'm interested in seeing whether we can accelerate this second curve. We know that places like DARPA can accelerate the first curve of change. The question is whether we can become the DARPA of our species coevolution, whether we can accelerate the second curve into being. The question is not what kind of future the computer will become, but what kind of people we are becoming. Can humans understand about human understanding increase? Can we learn what actually makes teams work? Can we truly understand cognition? Do we have a moral obligation to use enhancement technologies to make ourselves beings who are more compassionate, moral, wise? Is that our only shot at survival? As the centrist Audé de Gusse says, the ability to learn faster than your competition may be the only sustainable competitive advantage. The stakes could not be more high. We cannot detect any other intelligent life in the universe. It has occurred to me to wonder whether every intelligent species gets to this point where it takes control of their own evolution. Maybe this is the final exam. Maybe everybody else flunked. Let's not us flunk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. We have about 10 minutes for a Q&A if you have some questions for Joel. And we have 2 mics up here at the front. So I'd love to hear some questions from you. I'm sure you have many. So we're going to have to get the first few that come up. So who's got a burning question? We've got so much content here. I'd love to
Have
hear.
I shocked you into silence? I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Could you come up to the
Can you
mic?
come up to the mic?
Speak it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but they can't.
Yeah, if you
They're
could just
recording.
Come up to the mic and. Sorry. Tell us your name and your
My name is
question.
Kelvy.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. My question is around emotional intelligence and how you see that fitting into the picture.
That's a great question. Emotional intelligence, yeah, that's huge. Questions like that rarely come into play among the technologists, although I've just run into one who scares the hell out of me. There's a guy at DARPA, naturally, who's involved in a $70 million program called Subnets. And what he's doing is he's creating brain implants that are designed to cure PTSD, anxiety, depression, memory loss, and a bunch of other things. Sounds great, right? Here's the way he's doing it. He's creating brain chips that control emotions. What could possibly go wrong? All right. But when I talked to him, the thing that fascinated me was that I discovered he's like in his 30s, and he's like in love for the first time. And I thought, oh, this explains a lot. Love is a bad drug. Anyway, and what he really almost cares about PTSD. I mean, he's a DARPA principal investigator, so he knows what he's doing. But he's talking about eliminating barriers between humans so that you have total understanding. And he thinks, so he's approaching love from a scientific perspective, and he's trying to eliminate all barriers to his betrothed. Well, okay, that's a scenario. Fine, 70 million. Okay, fine. I mean, try it and go for it. You know, what the hell? Knock yourself out. But in the meantime, I'm as I say, I'm a humanist, and so I'm kind of a believer in the Prevail scenario. I think that we're a complicated collection of, our core challenge as a species is that we are social animals and we are individuals. It's a real damn problem. On the one hand, solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments we've got. On the other hand, we're, in this country, 300 million crazy-ass individuals heavily armed. It's one of the risks we run. So the question is, when it comes to emotional intelligence, how can we accelerate that? That's a great question to which I'm hoping you all have some answers, one of which is to accelerate communications by finding novel forms. So I think I'm in good company.
We have time for one more question. We got one? Okay, great. There's a mic right here. You can say your name and let us know your question.
My name is Camila. I tend to see the problem of cultural, the values and everything, as being part of a fragmented way of thinking. Each element you brought was trying to solve a punctual problem. Each technology you mentioned was trying to solve punctual problems, like specific problems. And what I think is that we have to start thinking more in a whole.
Globally,
Yeah.
more.
And I think there are some cultures that was able to do this, and we practically extinct them, like Indians. And I come from Brazil, so there is this culture. I would like to know what you think about it.
That's a good question. Yeah, one of the things, again, I'm not a technoid. That's not my area. So when I was embedded at DARPA for a year, I was fascinated by these scientists who I was hanging out with. And these guys are obviously real smart. But I can't tell you how often I would say to somebody, there was one guy there who was involving themselves with increasing the number of mitochondria in your cells, which basically involves creating increasing the energy available to the humans in a fashion that's essentially indistinguishable from Superman, as a practical matter. And I mean, leap tall buildings in a single bound, stuff like that. And so I was like, well, what does this mean? I mean, you're talking about changing what it means to be human, right? And I'll never forget his response. He said, what a fascinating question. I never thought of that before. Right? Well, I mean, the thing to think about these guys who are creating this future is that, I mean, they're not dumb, but they are incredibly focused. They do not wake up in the morning thinking about how they're going to change what it means to be human. They wake up in the morning thinking about how they're going to wire the goddamn monkey. That's what they're focused on, okay? So that's why it matters a lot for us to be involved in this process as it's being developed. That's a big chunk of what I think the Peril project is all about, is getting involved in the, by the time this technology is being shown on a stage at Cupertino, it's too late to really have a dramatic effect on this product. By the time this stuff is riding around without drivers on the streets of Palo Alto, it's too late. So that means that those of us who are humanists need to, hitch up our pants and get involved in this now and get involved in understanding what's coming at us in some way such that we can intervene. I'll give you one example, and then I'll give it, which is, so the crowd I hang out with who are involved with intervening, trying to get in with the scientists who are happy to have civilians. There was a woman who at Biodesign at ASU who was working on a biomarker for a disease that would tell you years in advance that this disease was on its way. Now the thing is, the biomarker that she was working on was for a disease that has no cure. And we're like, gee, thanks, You're going to tell us 20 years in advance that is hope. We said, like, is there any possibility that you could be finding a biomarker that you would find equally challenging that would be for a disease that you could cure? And she said, what a fascinating idea. I never thought of that. So the point is, it's not, this is too important to leave to the scientists and the technologists. We need to embrace it ourselves.
Thank you, Joel.